Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, Iran at a crossroads.
A lot of Iranians, young Iranians right now feel like they need something to change, to believe that there is a prosperous future within their own country.
Faced with a dwindling economy and a depleted list of allies, how will Iran's leadership address its current challenges? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take.
My name is Dorsa Jabbari. I'm a correspondent with Al Jazeera English, and at the moment I'm in Doha, Qatar.
So, Dorsa, welcome to The Take. Tuesday marks 46 years since the revolution against the Shah of Iran and the rise of the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, this anniversary comes at a very critical time. Just over the weekend, Iran's currency fell to a new all-time low against the U.S. dollar, which seems to be tied to the U.S. President Donald Trump restarting his maximum pressure campaign on Tehran, which is, essentially more sanctions.
And we will once again enforce the most aggressive possible sanctions, drive Iranian oil exports to zero, and diminish the regime's capacity to fund terror throughout the region and throughout the world.
Can you give us a sense of how Iran is looking at things as we start this new Trump era?
The Iranian officials are very disappointed that Trump has reinstated this so-called maximum pressure campaign. Now, I want to remind you that this campaign never went away. During the previous Trump presidency, he brought this on to put pressure on Iran, to bring them to the negotiating table. And under the Biden administration, it was still in place. His administration never enforced it. Now, Trump saying that he signed it again just means he's putting more pressure on the Islamic Republic. He is trying to force them to the negotiating table. And this was a tactic that he tried using from 2018 until he left the White House. And it failed. Despite everything that he tried, he thought it would bring Iran to the negotiating table. And Iran stood its ground, and they refused to negotiate under these conditions.
Yeah, Iran has stood its ground, but it has suffered, right? So give me just a sense of what it's like in Iran with the currency so devalued, how that affects normal people.
Well, the currency is pegged to the US dollar, usually. And over the past year, it has lost over 75% of its value. And that is because the economic situation continues to deteriorate. And every time there are sanctions introduced, the rial plummets as a result of its relationship with the US dollar. And what that means is usually the average Iranian was making about $200 a month. That was an average salary. And they could manage, according to government figures, to be able to afford the basic standard of living above the poverty line, people need to make $500 a month. Now, that is not even being met by the majority of the population. But the $130 they are now making is also the bare minimum. I know many people who are now going without being able to afford basic things like meat is a staple in Iranian food. Most homes used to have it 2-3 times a week. And now I talk to people and it's like a luxury. They can afford it maybe once a month. Also, it limits people's spending powers. It restricts them. And that has a knock-on effect in other aspects of the economy as well. People are not spending. People are not going out for dinners anymore as much. So what it does is really force a population to pay for the decisions of the political establishment that is in power. And that is something we've seen in other countries as well. It's not new to Iran per se, but it's 46 years of this.
Is the government meeting the moment? Is it able to provide extra support for people, or are people just going hungry?
No, people are hustling. That's what Iranians are known for. They can hustle. Most people I know have 2-3 jobs. One income is no longer enough. Both the men and women work in a family. And so they hustle. They make ends meet. But that is not sustainable long term. The government is doing its best, but it's really not enough. The demand is so high. The economy is so far gone. The IMF just basically says this country is not worth even considering in terms of a financial future. And, Iran is not a poor country. It used to be OPEC's second biggest provider of oil. It has the world's fourth biggest oil supplies. But the money is restricted. It is blocked in certain parts of the world as a result of sanctions. And also the sale of Iranian gas under Trump in 2018 became sanctioned as well. So any country that is trying to buy Iranian oil will face consequences. So that also has had an effect on the country's economy.
So, Dorsa, it's been a tough year for Iran economically, but also regionally. You have the loss of Iran's ally, Bashar al-Assad, in Syria, while in Lebanon, Hezbollah, which has supported Iran, is still trying to recover from the war with Israel. I guess so far, Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen seem unscathed. But I'm wondering, can you talk about how Iran sees itself in this moment, how it's faring as a regional power?
Well, Iran sees itself maintaining its position despite what has happened to its proxies, because they believe that these moments in history are just that moments, that they will pass. They have had difficult periods before. During the Iran-Iraq War, 8 years Iran suffered. It was completely isolated. Saddam Hussein had the support of most of the countries. And Iran fared through that and tried to come out of it afterwards. And so what we're hearing now is, yes, they have suffered through their proxies, but that doesn't mean that they're completely out in terms of their influence. Hezbollah is still operational. Granted, they're not what they used to be before September. Bashar al-Assad is living in Russia and has withdrawn completely, but now Iran is opening dialogue with the new administration in Damascus. Just a few days ago, the Turkish intelligence chief was in Tehran. Before that, the Russians were visiting Tehran. And the visits that we had from the Iranian officials in Damascus in early December, we saw Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, having a meal in a restaurant in Damascus before Bashar al-Assad fled Syria. So I think the Iranians saw it coming. I think they were positioning themselves, they were bracing themselves for what was to come. I think what is really important, and it will dictate how Iran moves forward in terms of its regional influence, is what we will see between Saudi Arabia, the US, and Israel. Because this fight we've seen through Iran's proxies in the region has really been one that's between Iran and Saudi Arabia. These two regional foes, not enemies, I would say foes, that have had their ups and downs for various different religious, political reasons over the past few decades. And I think what happens next with Trump in the White House and how his relationship will move forward with MBS and Israel will really dictate how Iran and its proxies will react in the region.
More with Dorsa after a break. So hovering over all of this is the nuclear issue, right? In the first Trump administration, the U.S. famously pulled out of a deal brokered by President Obama that halted Iran's nuclear program in exchange for relief on sanctions. Since then, Iran's rial has fallen 90%. What's the thinking in Iran right now? Is the weapons program seen as an inevitability, or could it be a bargaining chip for a future deal that does relieve those sanctions?
Well, the official position is they don't have a nuclear weapons program. They just have a peaceful nuclear program. Now, it's advancing at a rapid pace. And according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, there is no reasonable explanation provided by the Iranian officials about why they need to enrich uranium at 60% levels. Now, Iran, under the nuclear deal, the JCPOA of 2015, agreed to limit enrichment to 3.67%. Since Trump signed that deal and got out of it, withdrew the US from that deal, the Iranians said, well, there's no point for us to abide by this because the main point was to get the US to lift the sanctions and allow our country to try and flourish economically on the international scale. So what they did from a year after in 2019 was they took steps, step by step. They reduced their commitment to the nuclear deal. And where we are right now is the deal is gone. It's going to expire at the end of in October of this year anyway. So it was a 10-year deal that was negotiated in 2015. So now they have to start from scratch. And we have to remember this deal took years to get under Obama. And it's not something that can be done in 6 months, whatever Trump may think or hope. It's a long process because there's a lot of technical aspects to it. So for the Iranians, they are accumulating enriched uranium at a grossly high speed. And under the old deal, what was happening to the enriched uranium was that it was being shipped out. Russia was one of the places that was taking it in to store it outside of Iran, so the Iranians wouldn't have access to it. Now they have, over 2,000 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. The IAEA can't say anything because under the agreement, they are allowed to have a nuclear program. They are part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty from the 1970s. And they've said this is for civilian nuclear purposes. So there's a lot of different aspects to it. And the Iranians are advancing to, yes, eventually say, yes, we have all the capabilities to enable us to get the deal that we need to get that is best for this country. So the more advanced the nuclear program is, at the time they're going to sit down at a negotiating table, the more advantages they will have in being able to get what they want.
The bigger the program, the bigger the bargaining chip. What about the new president, Masoud Pezeshkian? I know when he was elected last year, he was hailed as a great reformer. Is he making good on that promise?
Well, there's a couple things he's done that show promise, but it's still very early. I think in Iran, we have learned long ago not to really get too excited too fast. The first thing he did was there's the controversial mandatory hijab law that was before Parliament, and it went back to the Guardian Council, that is a legislative body that approves the laws that are approved in Parliament. And under this new mandatory hijab, it's an amendment to an already existing law. The fines were becoming extremely heavy and severe for women. So this was a very controversial thing. It's gone back and forth, and basically his government has just shelved it for the time being because the one thing they cannot afford is more upheaval inside the country. The other thing was he unblocked WhatsApp on mobile phones in the country. That is something that happened during the protests in 2022. And then aside from that, he's made promises that we're waiting to see come to fruition. But I think it would be unfair to put all the expectations on him because Iran has a very complicated system of governance that doesn't mean the president has all the powers. He is part of a system. He's a player on a chessboard, basically. He doesn't have the ultimate authority. So I think he's done the best that he can under these circumstances. But the team around him appear to be a team that is Western educated. They are mostly fluent in English. They have negotiated with the Trump team as well. So they're familiar with the people that they're going to be dealing with and whether or not they will succeed.
So you could picture some sort of grand summit happening between Pezeshkian and a Trump, but behind both of them would be restricting forces. I guess for Pezeshkian, it would be the hardliners in the government, and for Trump, it'd probably be Israel saying, whoa, pump the brakes here.
Yeah. And I think we've heard over the past few years various different stories about how, there was a lot of attempts made by various countries and entities. In 2015, many parties tried to sabotage the nuclear deal at that time. And I think we will also see that happen again in various different forms, whether it be another assassination in Iran or more other destabilizing actions that are taken to try and throw wrenches into whatever could be coming,
Yeah.
Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated while attending inauguration for the new president in July. And Israel admitted to that as well. And I think it was the objective was twofold. One was to assassinate Ismail Haniyeh and to get rid of him by Israel. But the second was also to deliver a message to Iran that we can reach whomever, wherever inside Iran, and we're not afraid to do so. And I think Ismail Haniyeh's assassination came just after they assassinated Hanah Shokeir in Lebanon, and prior to Nasrallah's assassination in September. So I think it was a huge blow for Iran.
Yeah. As we wrap up, let's keep the focus on the Iranian people. A lot of Iran's population weren't born during the 1979 revolution, right? The country went through months of protest under the slogan of women, life, freedom, not too long ago. What's on the minds of young Iranians right now who are looking towards the future?
I think a lot of Iranians, young Iranians right now feel like they need something to change, to believe that there is a prosperous future within their own country. Because a lot of people have just lost hope that the economic situation will turn around. And even if there was a deal signed in 2015, we didn't see anything until Trump withdrew from it. Basically, it's a slow process. We have to remember, invoking sanctions on a country can happen right away, quickly, and you can enforce it immediately. But removing them is a process that takes a long time. So for Iranians to see benefits from removal of sanctions would take years, and some say decades. So it's not clear even if this current generation will see any of the benefits of what could happen. So that is a concern for a lot of young Iranians. Most of them I've talked to say that they basically just want to be able to have a future in their own country. They want to have economic stability. They want to be able to afford basic standard of life. And they want to be able to do that without leaving the country. There has been a huge brain drain in Iran over the past few years. And it's very, very difficult. I think people don't understand how difficult it is to leave your own country and set up somewhere new. But many have chosen to do that because they just don't see a future in Iran. But the ones that have stayed, have either chosen to stay or haven't been able to leave, are hoping that the government will at least hear them and do everything it can to try and help. In what way, shape, or form that will be is not clear because, like I said, Iran's defensive program, half of the government's budget annually goes towards the country's defensive capabilities. So it's always the number one priority. And people are hoping that either there will be economic growth or that mentality might shift as a result of what is happening to the country's economic situation inside.
So half of the country's budget goes towards security, and it's those programs that made it vulnerable to these types of sanctions in general. So it's always this balance between security and the economy.
Yes. You can have a very strong, capable defensively Iran. Billions of dollars are spent on its defensive programs in order to ensure its security. But it's come at a cost. And that is very clear now inside the country.
But that's always been the case. Trump thought that if you make it painful enough for the Iranian people, eventually they would come to the table. Eventually things would break, but it just hasn't happened. I mean, is there a sense that there's a breaking point anywhere close, or are people just going to keep trudging along?
No, people just keep going to go. They're 46 years, of sanctions. So
years.
What's another 4?
All right. Dorsa, thank you for coming on The Take.
Thank you for having me.
And that's The Take. If you liked this episode, drop a comment below and let us know what you think. And as always, we're listening to your feedback on the show. So tell us what kind of episodes you like more of and what you thought of this one. We read every single comment, so don't hold back. We'll be back tomorrow.